Alright, welcome to No Less Survival, and that's where the more you know, the less you need. I'm going to go over a $200 GMRS build. This is built as a home station in mind, so this unit is going to be mostly stationary. A couple of things to get into. We're going to separate it into 3 points. The first point is going to be the big parts of this build and where I got them from, or how much I got them for at the very least. The second part is going to be ways to make things like this work, and the third thing is going to be things I discovered along the way. Again, it's about knowing more and then needing less. So I approach this build with that in mind. I could have very easily bought my way out of this, but instead I wanted to take the time to learn how these all work and how to fix them if they break. So, first, part one. This is a Kenwood 8180H. It's essentially a high-power GMRS radio. They're used a lot in ambulances, fire departments, and law enforcement. A lot of times they got pulled out of those units before they went to auction and got sent to a reseller or ended up in someone's basement somewhere in a box and then get dropped off at a thrift store, and bada bing bada boom, here it is. So the big thing to remember about, excuse you, I can't move this with you right now, okay? But I'm going to put it over here. All right, thank you. And thank you very much. All right, Bendy, my mascot. So when you run one of these, you're going to need a way to power it. They like 12 volts. They like a clean 12 volts. They like between 10 and 15 amps. 15 amps on the transmit, that's on the higher end, and about between 5 and 10 amps resting, depends on how much power you're giving them. So to be mindful of that, not every source of 12 volt power will work with those. I cannot say enough good things about thrift stores, because oftentimes people drop off things that they don't see any value in, and you can find something that works within that. I found a PC case, hard drive's gone, RAM's gone. For some reason, just the fan for the motherboard's gone. Don't know why, don't know where it is, don't care. I got the fan, one of the two PC fans was working when I put 12 volts to it, great, and I also got the power supply out of it. A GMRS radio, or any radio power that you can buy on the internet, between $100 and $200, gives you clean 12 volts, gives you up to 30 amps, and usually accepts AC to 12 volt. A PC also accepts AC to 12 volt, also delivers clean power, also negotiates between that 15 to 30 amp range. The difference being, instead of paying $100 or $200 for just the power supply for the radio, with a little bit of know-how, you can take that $40 Goodwill find of a computer tower that doesn't work anymore, is corrupted, and get a good and nice working power supply that's going to give you that same amount of power with some know-how. The antenna was one of the few things that I bought that's new, just because I really like. There's a seller on Amazon that has like they're $40. Their magnets are tuned for between 462 and 467 megahertz, which is what most of my channels run in between. These are channels that I have tuned for the head unit and handhelds. Connects by magnet to anything metal if you're going to use it inside, at home, and you haven't built a larger antenna yet, which we'll get to in a different video. But also goes great for mobile. You attach it to the outside of your car, and now you have a mobile GMRS unit. Power. A couple things you're going to need as far as supplies. You're going to need 10 gauge AWG. You're going to need 12 gauge AWG. You're going to need an inline fuse. It can be blade or glass, as long as you get a 15 amp fuse in there. To give you an idea of what that looks like, this is a blade fuse. You see them a lot of times in automotive. I put a 15 amp in here, and I wired that into my positive side. Go on your positive side. Here's another example. This is a glass fuse. This is on a Vertex standard. This one takes a little bit more power, so this one's going to get wired directly into the vehicle. Oh. Yeah. No outtakes. Only one take that gets it. Glass fuse, this also negotiates 15 amps. And what you want this in there for is in case there's ever a surge. This is going to protect your wiring, and this is going to protect your units. So you always want your fuses as close to the unit you're trying to protect as possible. And especially when you're dealing with wiring of older units that may or may not have some underlying issues. All right, so part 3, the know-how. You need to know what certain things do, and the best way to know is to learn. No one knows everything. So immediately I researched, because out of the units that I've worked with, most of the time they don't start unless this yellow wire is connected. And this is basically the remote start wire. This is what automatically will turn this unit on if it was plugged into a vehicle. And then you turn the ignition. Good to know. A lot of them don't run without it unless you go through their programming software and turn that off. This one worked without it right off the bat, and I figured it out because when I had wired this to test it before I made it permanent for installation, I had forgotten to wire this into your positive lead. So that's how you also bypass that. It's good for you to know. But it turns out this unit was already set up to be a base station unit. Saved me a step. But it's good for you to know that if you're trying to take a mobile unit or a unit that was used for a mobile purpose and turn it into a home station unit, then this goes with the red, and then that problem solved. Or you can do it through programming and then basically make this inactive. If it's going to be inactive, tape it over so it doesn't come into contact with anything, because it will build static or voltage on its own, because it still can negotiate power as a positive. The computer units. So you're going to see a lot of wires. It's going to seem pretty intimidating at first. You're going to want to take your primary connector, that's the one that goes to your motherboard. If you don't know what the motherboard is, it's the biggest green board, and it usually has a big square heat sink block into it, basically square of aluminum there, and a fan. This is what does most of the work in negotiating power to your USB ports, to your disk drives, and things like that. This is what does most of the work for the small voltage stuff. You don't need any of these other wires in here. You need to focus on the green wire, which is always that wire that's telling the power supply when to provide power. So if you don't get it on without using this green wire, it will never be another color, and it will usually be, or always is, the only green wire in these cases. Unlike traditional wiring, a green wire does not mean ground. This is doing something. This is negotiating something. And then you're going to take any one of these black wires. These black wires are our neutral wires. That does not change. In the same way that these reds are going to produce voltage. These are all 5-volt wires. So that doesn't change. But you're going to take any of those blacks. You're going to cut that out of the harness too. And you're going to crimp those together. A lot of guys put like UV connectors or Wacos on those so that they can unconnect it and reconnect it when they need to. I don't find a need for that. I think that you can do the same thing by unplugging the unit or grabbing a power supply that has its own on and off switch. So I crimped those together, and I just electrical taped these because I didn't feel like heat shrinking them. Mostly because I had to put the heat gun away at that point. This is going to make sure that your power supply can turn on. You're going to do this step last, though. The harness you're going to look for is a harness that powers most of the 12-volt things in the PC, and that is going to have a certain amount of yellow wire and a certain amount of black wire in pairs. So they'll always be symmetrical. It will be 3 yellow and 3 black, 4 yellow and 4 black, in this case 2 yellow and 2 black, and so on and so forth. So these are what are responsible for the 12-volt and high amperage power. Typically you'll see something like a P2, F2, or I think I've seen like X1, something dumb serialized onto that harness unit. And it looks, I'm sure I have it somewhere. Oh, there it is. It looks like this. It doesn't look like it does much, but the 4-pin is responsible typically for running the things that require a 12-volt draw on a PC. You want it because it runs your radio. So you need to leave in between 12 and 10 gauge, depending on the radio, and heading to the radio. And that's going to stop, you don't want heat buildup, you don't want undersized wire. Not only will those affect the cleanness of your signal transmission, but over time, that current is going to wear at those wires, and it has potential to melt those wires, especially on surges. And those surges are when you're transmitting. The radio demands more power, or not more power, but more amperage at that point. So that's going to increase the load on that wiring. You twist your yellow pairs together, you twist your black pairs together, and now your yellow becomes your positive, so that goes yellow to red, and then obviously your black goes to your black. I love heat shrinks. You can get them cheap. I got a multi-pack for like $5. I usually crimp and then heat shrink, or solder and then heat shrink. If it's a unit that I wanted to run cold, I tend to go with crimps just because it takes a lot less setup work. You just grab your crimp tool, you grab your assorted crimps, which are also like a $4 to $6 multi-case, and they're usually size specific and color coded. You crimp them in, make sure those connections are tight to the light pole before you heat shrink. And that heat shrink is going to do a few things. If it is in an outside or like a shed, radio shed, guys like those, or something can be exposed to the elements, it's going to provide a barrier for waterproofing. But it also gives you some, radios get moved a lot, so it's going to give you some resistance there. If anything's pulling or tugging, you're not going to lose your connectors, and those aren't going to go bad. So it's always best to double up, whether you're soldering, then heat shrinking, or crimping and heat shrinking, two means of putting that wire together. Why can't I use wire caps? Well, wire caps are not meant really for permanent installations of this sort of wiring. So you can use it to twist a couple things together real quick to test radio or provide power and make sure your wiring's correct. But when you go to set this up for permanent use, you want a permanent solution. Most guys will opt to solder. I'm just not one of those, and you can take from that what you will. Bendy, what are you eating? That's kind of gross, but I'm gonna let you do it. That's our resident mascot. She finds everything. Now, I did allude to this a little bit before, but the inline fuses, you can get these lines, and they're sized up or down typically based on the fuse that they're sold with, for about $4 or $5 in the auto parts store. I found this one digging in a bin of miscellaneous cords. It's where I find most of my stuff at a few thrift stores, and those tend to be baskets that are just a bunch of cords, extension cords, HDMIs, old USBs, old telephone cables, and every once in a while you find something that you can find useful. If it holds a fuse, if it's red, if it's black, if it has a SATA or a USB end on it, buy it. As long as it's not crazy expensive, put it in a drawer that's labeled for those sort of things. And the next time you need to work on a project like this with a lot of moving parts, you have the ability to do that. For a radio that goes in a vehicle, I prefer things that have their own connection on it. This one has a physical switch. This is going to be a mechanical dead between your positive leads, the one that, so that way you can cut power off. But it's also a good indicator on your 12-volt power source in your car. A lot of work trucks will leave those on even after the key's out of the ignition because they're used to running things that need to stay on. But a lot of your sedans, regular residential vehicles are going to cut power to those. So you're going to need to learn how to wire directly from your battery into a fuse terminal. And this is going to let you know you did it right. Because when the key's out of the ignition, this little boy will still be glowing. It doesn't draw enough to kill anybody's healthy battery. And this will let you know that your radio is still good to go before you mess around with plugging this guy in. This is an example of a unit that is built to run off of straight voltage. This does not have that radio unit on and off. So it's not the end of the world of it turning on and off with the car, but it's worth mentioning with all electronics, it's not them being on that wears them out, it's the constant on and off, and that goes for most sensitive electronics or things that have surge. So the third part is things to watch out for. When you're looking for a unit, not every bargain is worth the price, right? I lucked out. This is a sweetheart deal. It's $25 for the radio, $5 for the handheld I found somewhere else. You're going to look for corroded connectors. You're going to look for evidence of stripped out screws and the things that come off. Those are going to tell you that someone's been at this before. Maybe someone stripped it for parts in this, or tried to repair it and failed. Things like this, right? Like a lot of these dust covers are still intact on this radio because it really didn't do much. It was definitely set up as a home unit and probably just sat on a shelf. But if those are teared or ripped, or there's a lot of debris, especially exterior attributed debris into those areas, you might want to stay away from that because You get a little involved when you're taking apart these head units, and unless you've taken the time to kind of learn and research that, or you're up for the challenge, it could be frustrating and it could put a damper on your ability before you start. For power supplies, especially PC power supplies, you're going to look for things like discoloration around the fan unit, a large amount of dirt or dust on the fan unit. Dust is going to be common with these because people don't tend to vacuum them out before they drop them off, but that discoloration or that burnt or seared dust around the fan will tell you that it was running hot and it probably burnt out the fan. If it was running hot and burnt out the fan, it probably isn't worth you trying to fix. The same thing goes with these. If any of these are sheared or a lot of them are cut, it means that someone probably already fucked with it and tried to do something with it. Maybe it was a running unit, and maybe they're done with it. Maybe they upgraded to a ham radio power supply and they're kind of done with this. But those are things to look out for. Anything that looks like it's been sitting outside when it comes to power that isn't meant to be outside is something you're going to stay away from. With a unit like this, things to look out for. This came with this handheld. It will work for testing anyway. But you see how all that is frayed and this jacket has just been toasted? This sat in someone's car and on their dashboard. So all of this non-PV or non-UV rated cord became fragile. All the jacketing became fragile. The wiring in it is mostly intact, at least enough to test with. But for the price of these units, you can find a new one between $10 to $15. You don't want to save something like this for permanent use because that wear is only going to get worse, and it just does affect your signal clarity because you're no longer having protection for those wires, and you will start to get tears in those wires, which are going to affect the current and the efficiency at which it runs. The third thing to mention as far as best practices is don't set one of these up without a plan to kind of build on that or to have a greater degree of communication. I like GMRS because I also use GMRS handhelds. So all of us, or my entire family, has a GMRS handheld on-rechargeable and an extra set of batteries in our bug-out bags and in our and I keep mine in my EDC bag. This means that if there's an emergency, even my kids have been trained to understand, okay, power's out, let me turn on the radio. And all of my radios will run on solar backup or power bank backup, depending on how I have them set up. This means that they can talk to me because I work for myself and I work locally. In most cases, they can reach me anywhere I am in town. And I live in a town that isn't small and isn't big, but if I'm within 20 miles, they can reach me. And that's going to be important in settling anxiety and coming up with a preparedness plan in an SHTF scenario. These units, you can find them a lot of times on like bargain stores, eBay, Facebook marketplaces, where I kind of got a hold of quite a few of these for a really great price. You can also buy them new. These are Cobras. It's a lower end GMRS unit. The good thing about these is they're waterproof and they're pretty much like drop in the pond type waterproof. And they're really bright colored, not just all Kenwood out. I find these are great for the kids because the buttons are big and it helps teach them a radio etiquette, which is going to be very important on GMRS channels, especially if you're transmitting on channels other people are too. A lot of community channels, for instance. Which, again, another part of part 3 is the community. As I mentioned before, the GMRS communities are pretty close-knit, and it's not hard to find them. They're friendly guys usually. They're guys who like to think of things. They're guys who like to learn. They're guys who like to communicate. And they'll teach you. And that's been great for me. Because when I first got into GMRS radio, I knew nothing except what the internet told me. And thankfully, forums exist. So before I met anybody in person, I was able to talk on forums and get linked in on certain Reddit subgroups. That allowed me to kind of find a community that was doing, in New London, there's actually an older Peter. And they were able to teach me. And learning is going to be the most important part here. A couple of other things to watch out for is a lot of the older units run on very specific hardware or software. And those programming softwares are getting harder and harder to find if you don't know where to look. They're usually buried in some obscure internet archive somewhere or on a disk that some guy's reselling on eBay. I stay away from anything that was manufactured before 1980. Because a lot of times, unless it's a manually tuned crystal radio, which are really damn hard to find, at least on a budget, it's more trouble than you're worth because they run on older operating softwares and things that just don't really talk the same language anymore. So it's harder to kind of backdate that. This Kenwood was from the 90s to early 2000s. This one is on the 90s end of things. It takes 89D as a software, and you can find the download software for that for like $20 on eBay, and the programming cable, which is another important part. You can find Chinese knockoffs for like 10 or 15 bucks, or the original cables for about $20 to $25 on resale. And those are going to allow you to plug this into a laptop while it's turned on and program it, and set your channels and set how you want it to behave and how you don't want it to behave. And that is worth mentioning because you're going to be hitting your head against the wall if you get this all running, you turn it on, and you think it's going to work, and you don't know what you're doing. For something like the Vertex Standard, the programming software was open sourced a long time ago, but this is a good example of something that's going to be subject to FCC guidelines that changed right around when it was manufactured. So this one was in 2000. This one was manufactured in 2010. In 2013, the FCC changed the guidelines for manufacturing of these radios, and they basically said, "Hey, manufacturers, after this, you need to lock people out of GMRS channels unless they can prove that they have the GMRS license." Big government. So what they did was they released their software, and in their software, you can spoof your date on your device, usually your laptop, to just backdate your device, and then the software will backdate itself on install. And that is a really good workaround if you're trying to get your GMRS channels done and you don't happen to have a license. I have a license, not super worried about it, but it's just a way to kind of get around that bricking, because by the time you go through the trouble of proving that you have a license or going to like a radio distributor to get yours unlocked, you could have done it yourself by just changing it from 2025 to 2010 in your laptop long enough to program your radio and then switch it back when you're done. A lot of software runs off of the date and time on your laptop. That's worth mentioning. So those are a couple of hiccups that you run into with these. The other things that you run into is the things that go wrong, mechanical components that fail. LCDs will kind of get faded over time. Buttons will feel like they're not working and they're kind of stiff. Most of these units are pretty forgiving to take the head units off of, and you can swap these out for any miscellaneous radio parts that you end up finding. It will look a little janky, but it will work, and it should work soundly. For instance, like this adjuster knob isn't the adjuster knob that came with this radio. It actually came off my old Sony LTC that I had, an old car radio. So because the other radio button was all clunky, so I took this out, cleaned it all up, and I just put a new knob on it. Good as new. Be mindful on GMRS channels if you don't know what you're doing, and when you set your channels, make sure that you don't have a lot of traffic on those channels. That's for your privacy, that's for safety and security, but it's also out of kind of an etiquette and being courteous to the other people in this community that share this space with you. If you like this video and you would like to go deeper dive into any of the components, please let me know in the comments. Once again, it's No Less Survival, and that's where the more you know, the less you need, and I hope you found this informative or helpful. Have a great day.